Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're diving into the strange, and sometimes laughable, final chapters of people whose lives were supposed to be the picture of grace, royalty, kings, queens, emperors. Their days were wrapped in ritual and riches, yet the way they left this world? Some would probably rather that we politely skip over those details. Before we settle in, if you find this channel brings you a little something special, consider liking the video and subscribing. It means a lot to me, truly. And I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Share your city and the time of day down in the comments. There's something wonderful about connecting across continents. Maybe dim your lights a bit, and if it comforts you, turn on a gentle fan for that calm, steady hum. Let's relax into these stories together. Let's begin with King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, who met his end through a dessert. Monarchs meet their fate in many ways. Some fall in battle, others at the hands of betrayal, or, more majestically, surrounded by weeping court members. But Adolf Frederick? His downfall was sweet, quite literally. It was February 1771. The king, after a day that held little true stress, decided that he deserved a treat. His idea of a reward, however, went well beyond moderation. The feast began with lobster and caviar, followed by sauerkraut and smoked herring, all washed down with more than a few glasses of champagne. Remarkably, it wasn't this rich meal that did him in. What proved fatal were the 14 semlas he devoured, each a delicate and very heavy blend of wheat, cardamom, almond paste, and fluffy cream, served in warm milk. These sweet buns are rich enough to satisfy with just one, but the king managed 14. At some point, his attendants must have started to worry, perhaps suggesting a quiet walk. But with a dessert spoon in hand and laughter on his lips, he pressed on. Later that night, the king began complaining about cramps, which soon grew severe. Within hours, he collapsed. Officially, it was digestive trouble, but it's fair to say his love for sweets was his undoing. He left behind a reign known for calm reforms, and the legacy of being the monarch who ate himself to death. There are worse ways to go. He didn't fall to violence or disease after all, but next time you eye another slice of cake, perhaps remember his story and let the spoon rest. Moving on, King George II of Great Britain. His final act was on the royal toilet. Royalty, we imagine, planned to leave with great dignity. A soft farewell, a solemn speech, maybe even a choir's gentle tune. George II, though, met his end while attending to something much more ordinary. It was the morning of October 25th, 1760. Not feeling quite himself, the king carried on with his morning routine, conversation, perhaps some royal grumbling, and then, as all do, paid a visit to the privy. He failed to return. When servants entered, they found him slumped over, an aneurysm in his main artery bringing a swift and unceremonious end. Though his cause of death was natural, the location was less than regal. Imagine the King of England, not finishing on horseback, not peacefully in his bed, but halfway through a mundane task. Dignity out the window. The royal chamber pot may have been porcelain, possibly even rimmed with gold, but such details hardly cover the embarrassment. Physicians reported a heart problem, but gossip and a few candid palace staff made sure the real version survived. For all his achievements, George II is mostly remembered as the monarch who died as nature called, a peculiar legacy. Next, we have Sigurd the Mighty, the Viking who perished by a bite from a man already dead. Some royal endings are tragic, some outright absurd. But this? It's not even something a playwright could dream up. In the 9th century, Sigurd, earl, warlord, and fearsome figure, claimed victory over his foe, a Scottish chieftain named Mile Brigte. As a mark of victory, he tied his enemy's severed head to his saddle. This was, disturbingly, a not unheard-of display among Norsemen. The problem? The head's teeth were still sharp, and as Sigurd rode, they scraped his leg, leaving a minor wound. In an era lacking antibiotics, infection moved quickly. Before long, the mighty conqueror, who'd faced countless battles and triumphed, fell not to a blade but to a lifeless bite. The irony is nearly cosmic, defeated, finally, by a mouth that no longer moved. His followers must have been caught somewhere between grief and disbelief. Sigurd's story passed into legend, and even now, he stands alone as the Viking undone by a dental mishap. Now to Crown Prince Sado of Korea, whose sad fate became known as the rice chest tragedy. Some royal deaths bring a grin, others a shudder. Prince Sado's story falls in the latter category. Born to inherit the throne of the Joseon dynasty, Sado was troubled, struggling with violent moods and unpredictable moments. He was feared in the palace, rumored to wander at night, sword in hand, muttering to shadows. His father, King Yongjo, faced a terrible dilemma. Removing his son was politically dangerous and spiritually frowned upon, but letting him live, it seemed, was even riskier. Eventually, a heartbreaking decision was made. In the heat of summer, Sado was shut inside a wooden box meant for storing rice. No air, no water, no escape. For 8 days, he survived in darkness until the ordeal ended. No trial, no execution, just silent suffering. Official chronicles described his passing as divine judgment, but the truth remains much crueler. Though the event was rarely discussed by the royal family again, historians have not forgotten. It remains a story of harsh royal choices, untreated illness, and the cruelty that can emerge in the halls of power. Next time the summer heat feels heavy, remember Prince Sado, and be thankful your family solves its quarrels differently. On to King Martin of Aragon, claimed, it seems, by laughter. Have you heard that laughter is the best remedy? King Martin learned that there can indeed be too much of a good thing. It was 1410. The king, near the end of his days and suffering from ongoing stomach troubles, had spent the day mostly in bed. Not from wounds, but from persistent digestive woes. Hoping to lighten his mood, he called for his jester, asking for some much-needed mirth. The jester obliged with a curious joke. When the king asked why he was late, the reply was that he'd seen a deer hanging by its tail from a fig tree and was pondering whether it was a consequence from the gods. Something about the joke struck Martin. The delivery, the absurdity, perhaps his fragile state. He laughed so hard he began to gasp, clutching his sides, and then collapsed. The records state that laughter combined with indigestion were the cause. He's remembered as the monarch who laughed himself out of this life. Not exactly a heroic scene, no final charge, no famous speech, just a jest about a deer and sudden hilarity. His laugh sparked a succession crisis, and one can only imagine his advisors struggling to keep a straight face while recording the event. If ever you find yourself in the middle of a hearty laugh after dinner, perhaps remember Martin's fate, and breathe easy. Now for Emperor Qin Shi Huang, whose quest to avoid death turned fatal. If ever there was a person determined to escape mortality, it was Qin Shi Huang, first to unify China under a single rule. During his reign in the 3rd century BCE, he standardized currency, measurements, and language, oversaw grand building projects, and commissioned the famous terracotta soldiers to guard him after death, even though, ideally, he planned not to meet it at all. Obsessed with immortality, he instructed his court's alchemists and healers to find a way to make him live forever. The answer? Pills filled with mercury, gleaming and utterly toxic. But to the emperor, anything with a shine looked promising. He began taking these pills regularly. Soon, his health faded. He grew irritable, withdrawn, and took long journeys in search of more secret cures. It was while traveling, far from the capital, that he finally collapsed, poisoned, not by an enemy, but by his own supposed miracle remedy. The empire tried to hide his death for days to avoid unrest. During that time, legend has it, attendants traveled with boxes of rotting fish to cover the smell. His grand mausoleum still lays untouched today, possibly surrounded by rivers of mercury, a fitting end for someone so determined to outlast time. In his effort to become immortal, he serves as a caution about chasing eternal life without wisdom. Let's talk now about Pope John XII, whose brief and chaotic time as head of the Church ended in scandal. Taking the papal throne at just 18, John carved out a reputation not for spiritual guidance, but for excess. He filled the palace with parties instead of prayers. He gambled, drank, and broke nearly every church rule. Rumors even tell of blessing a man's mistress and raising cups to the wrong spirit during Mass. So, it's sadly no surprise that his death matched his infamous lifestyle. According to several sources, he suffered a stroke, not in prayer, but while in bed with another man's wife. That shocking story has lingered through the ages, though the official records sidestep it entirely out of embarrassment. Whether true or not, it says much about his reputation that it remains repeated to this day. His passing marked an end to one of the least conventional reigns for a pope, a man who blurred every line of sacred duty and walked right past the boundaries. Now to King Alexander of Greece, a monarch who lost his life in the most unexpected way, an encounter with monkeys. Royal life is risky. Threats of war, assassination, and sometimes rare dangers. In 1920, Alexander, newly crowned while his father was in exile, became the central figure in a sad and rather odd tale. Walking one afternoon in the royal gardens, his dog got into a scrap with a monkey, one of several left at liberty by a palace worker. Trying to break up the fight, Alexander was bitten on the leg by a second monkey. At first, the wounds seemed mild, but infection soon took hold and grew worse, leading to sepsis. Within weeks, he had died. The event threw the country into turmoil, reignited political conflict, and led to sweeping changes. News accounts of the time didn't quite know how to headline the story, often using vague phrasing. But no secret stays hidden, and so history remembers Alexander as the king undone by a pair of monkeys, an idea that still surprises to this day. King Charles II of Navarre met a fiery end, a victim not of poison or warfare, but brandy-soaked bandages and a single careless flame. His life, already marked by illness and intrigue, took an even stranger turn as his doctors prescribed a questionable cure, wrapping the ailing monarch tightly in linen soaked in alcohol, in hopes the treatment would warm him back to health. Once sewn into his new cocoon, a servant began cutting the bandage by candlelight. The flame touched the fabric, and, soaked with spirits, it caught instantly. Chaos followed, with people rushing to help. But the damage was done. Charles was too badly burned. After years plotting against rivals, he lost his life to a simple accident, undone by a moment of inattention. There's a lesson here. If your reputation is already difficult, don't mix strong drink with fire, especially when wrapped head to toe. King Edmund Ironside of England, his last moments are surrounded by suspicion and legend. Went only by Edmund II, he ruled fiercely but briefly, locked in constant conflict with invaders. His end, however, is said to have come in a place completely free of armor, the royal privy. According to persistent rumor, a plot was hatched. A killer hid beneath his wooden seat, and as Edmund sat, a blade flashed upward. There are other theories. The official records suggest injuries from battle, or a quiet betrayal, but it's this gruesome tale of privy assassination that captured imaginations. Nothing quite undercuts a warrior's legend like such a vulnerable moment. If it's true, It stands as one of the most cunning, if undignified, assassinations in royal history. Shifting to King Henry I of England. He met his end by eating one too many lampreys. After decades on the throne, surviving battles and intrigue, it was ultimately a simple dish that brought him low. Lampreys, those odd, eel-like fish, were a luxury food at the time, though now they might make many people pause. Henry adored them, even as his doctors begged him to be cautious. During a trip to Normandy, he couldn't resist. He ate an excessive amount. Very soon after, he was racked with pain. Swept by illness, he died, the cause clearly a fatal case of food poisoning. He may have been a skillful and strong-willed king, but his love of this odd delicacy was his undoing. A warning that some cravings are best tempered, no matter your status. James II of Scotland lost his life to his own artillery. Sometimes a monarch's ambition gets the best of him, and for James, his fascination with cannons proved fatal. In 1460, still very young, he oversaw the siege of Roxburgh Castle, eager to test his latest weapons. Ignoring a safe distance, he watched as the cannon was fired, but the old iron tube burst apart. A flying piece struck him, with fatal consequences. The shock left his men scrambling, though they soon regained control. The castle was later named after him, a dark tribute to the king whose enthusiasm for new technology overshadowed his caution. Let's pause with Emperor Elagabalus of Rome, whose rule was so strange it stands out even among extravagant emperors. Crowned as a teenager, he threw out tradition after tradition, appointing animals to office, staging unusual banquets, and even requesting a procedure to become physically female. But what unsettled Rome most was his disregard for deep-rooted customs, especially in matters of faith. His worship of a foreign sun god and the forcing of senators to watch as he danced before a sacred stone finally prompted the Praetorian Guard to end his reign, violently. Just 18 at his death, Elagabalus left a legacy of chaos, extravagance, and defiance, gone too soon for Rome's patience to endure. Next, Catherine II of Russia, known as Catherine the Great. She's remembered both for her leadership and her unfair share of scandal. As a leader, she expanded Russia's reach, supported the arts, and worked closely with great thinkers. Still, one persistent rumor follows her, that she died in a most shameful way involving a horse. This, of course, is pure fabrication, ammunition used by her detractors after her death. In reality, she passed away quietly from a stroke. No drama, no spectacle, just the finality of human frailty. Yet, being a powerful woman surrounded by enemies, salacious stories stuck to her memory. Her private life was often discussed far more than her political and cultural achievements. If there's a lesson here, it's how easily rumor outlives even the greatest acts. We continue with Emperor Valentinian II of Rome, a ruler whose death is wrapped in more questions than answers. Becoming emperor as a small child, he was a figurehead more than a true leader, overshadowed by the powerful General Arbogast. Tensions simmered as Valentinian came of age and began seeking real influence. One morning, however, he was found lifeless in his bath. No wounds, no signs of violence, just a silent end. Arbogast pronounced it a suicide, but historians have long doubted this, suspecting political murder. No matter the truth, his passing triggered chaos and civil war. Of all the royal deaths we've discussed, his remains the quietest, strangest mystery. And, as history often shows, emperors who die so conveniently seldom pass away entirely on their own. And now, a turn to a different kind of legend, the story of a poet and protector from ancient Greece, Telesilla of Argos. Born frail into a well-off family, Telesilla faced the world tucked behind quiet courtyards, her health always fragile. In a culture that prized athletic strength, especially in boys, her chances of leaving a mark seemed slim. Illness kept her away from public life, away from the temples and markets. Yet she found comfort and strength in words. Poetry became her way of facing the world, her lines dedicated to the gods, full of faith and deep emotion. Some ancient writers claimed that through her devotion she slowly regained her strength. Whether it was ritual, purpose, or simple determination, she rose, no longer the invalid by the window, but a woman restored. As she continued to write, her hymns were sung throughout Argos, bringing unity and inspiration, especially to the city's women. She taught them they were vital, woven into the city's very spirit, their place not just in home and hearth, but at the heart of the community. For Telesilla, writing was healing, an act of purpose that shaped not just herself, but those around her. This courage and clarity would be needed because war soon reached Argos. Sparta, the city's southern neighbor, always dangerous, finally struck. In a disastrous battle, the men of Argos were nearly all lost, leaving the gates open, the city all but lost. But within its battered walls, Telesilla saw not defeat, but the need to act. Amid mourning and chaos, she rallied the women. The young and old, nobles and servants gathered weapons, anything they could, swords, spears, stones. Telesilla drilled them, posted them along the walls, making the city appear ready for defense. The Spartans returned, expecting easy victory. Instead, they found the ramparts lined with determined women, led by a woman armed not just with weapons, but with resolve. The defense was fierce. Water boiled and thrown, stones rained down. This psychological and physical stand drove the invaders away, sparing the city humiliation. Telesilla did not claim a throne or wield her new power for personal gain. When peace came, she returned to her poetry. Her words were sung alongside her deeds. Her story became part of Argos's fabric, a lesson whispered to the next generations, not just about bravery, but about knowing when to put aside arms and return to song. Her legacy spread across Greece, her strength and talent a challenge to the idea that courage and creativity couldn't dwell in one person. Statues and verses honored her not as something otherworldly, but as a reminder that even the quiet and once overlooked could change the fate of a city. With time, Telesilla's story faded from the main pages of history. Her feats often mentioned only in passing, her poems surviving in fragments. But even these pieces whisper of a woman who built courage and hope from rhythm and rhyme. She left her mark not by the sword alone, but by lifting a city to its feet and teaching its daughters that voice and heart matter. Her tale reminds us, while much of ancient Greece has worn with the centuries, some legacies live on, not in conquest, but in stonework, in words carefully kept, and in the unspoken sisterhood that finds strength where the world least expects it. First, the stone. In the quiet halls of the old sanctuary at Argos, long after the noise of war faded away, there once stood a statue of Tella. It wasn't a towering figure carved from the finest marble, but a gentle tribute. She was shown sitting peacefully, scrolls spread at her feet, her hand resting gently on a helmet. There was no sword lifted high, no fierce pose, only calm, a portrait of someone who had mastered both creation and courage. Even her place in the temple mattered. It was Aphrodite's house, not Athena's, not the champion of battle, but the goddess of love, beauty, and here, perhaps, the quiet determination to endure. It was a silent but powerful change, patiently formed from stone. Then came the words. Most of Tella's songs and poems have been lost to time, but what endures speaks with deep respect and honesty. Across ages, scholars have tried to gather the pieces she left behind, finding not just beauty in her craft, but also a window into her inner world. She belonged to the lyric tradition, her verses close, melodic, and filled with devotion. These weren't written to dazzle crowds. They were written, it seems, to reach the heart. Perhaps that's why her voice lingered, even when her deeds grew faint. And then, the circle of women. Tella's story became a kind of whispered anthem through generations, especially to those kept from armies, denied a voice, or overlooked. She gave something more precious than tactics. She gave permission. Permission to step forward, to speak, to care, to guard what mattered. She became more than a name from history. She became a reflection, a mirror showing each new generation of women their own hidden strength, even when obscured by the passing of centuries. Her story has sparked plays and poems, filled chapters in learned books. Modern scholars of women's history no longer place her at the edge. She stands at the center, a reminder that when the world goes quiet, one person's memory can still make a sound. And when history closes its doors, remembrance can show a way through. In classrooms, books, and in gentle conversations among those searching for women heroes, Tella's memory endures. She is the quiet protector of those undervalued, the poet who didn't just sing of bravery, but lived it. Tella never sought to be remembered. She never demanded statues or pleaded for her name to be inscribed for all time. Yet here we are, more than 2 millennia later, still speaking of her, still moved by what she did in a time and place that tried to erase her. It isn't just that she fought or wrote. It's that she did both, when neither was allowed or expected. A fragile girl with a simple instrument was never meant to carry warriors into battle. A woman shaping hymns was not supposed to shape the fate of her people, yet she did it. Not with fortune or noble lineage, but through steadiness, intention, and quiet strength. Amid the stories of the heroic age, with its strong-armed champions and flowing robes, Tella is set apart. She doesn't rage like the great warriors, nor plot like the clever kings. She does something much harder. She stands steady. She meets the threat of ruin and does not turn away. Not because she felt no fear, but because someone had to rise, and she was the one who did. That is why her influence lasts. She shows us that courage doesn't always appear with a shouting crowd or the approval of poets. Sometimes bravery is a woman gripping a sword in trembling hands, gathering herself and deciding, not this day. Still today, artists and thinkers are inspired by Tella's legacy. Her tale is studied in courses about women's roles, discussed in conversations about who can fight and lead, and brought up in talks about how roles change over time. She represents more now than one ancient city. She stands for resistance itself. If you listen closely, her voice still hums beneath today's stories. In every woman who steps forward while others wait, in each artist who refuses to be confined, in every small act of bravery that grows into something unforgettable, there is Tella. Her story isn't only in the past, it moves with us, quietly alive in the world. Because in truth, her instrument was never set down. It simply changed, becoming something braver, sharper. Before there were arches, before designs were drawn or even imagined, people simply needed to get from one place to another. Across quick waters, deep valleys, and dangerous gaps, our earliest ancestors faced a simple, ancient problem: how to cross when there is nothing beneath your feet. The very first bridges were not inventions of skilled builders, but the lucky discoveries of those wandering or hunting, who noticed a fallen branch over a stream or vines hanging above a ravine. These weren't made, they were found. Nature gave the first clue, and people followed. A log, a line of well-placed stones. That was the origin of the bridge, born from a mix of need, worry, and hope. Slowly, what was found by accident became something built with intention. In thick forests, people started tying vines and reeds to form swinging paths. You wouldn't want to cross them in darkness. They shook and swayed, but they kept people fed, kept families together. In what is now South America, early cultures used plant fibers twisted together to make longer, suspended crossings. These weren't just simple ropes. They were woven, strengthened, improved over generations. The Inca, long before outside armies came, had raised this craft to an art, perfecting the rope bridge. But even before the heights of the Inca Empire, people living among the Andes had learned the dizzying science of stretch, support, and the patience of materials. It wasn't the size of these first bridges that makes them stand out, but their daring. Imagine gazing into a wide, wild canyon and, instead of turning away, beginning to knot blades of grass into cords. That's not only cleverness, it's bravery shaped by need. These first ways across changed more than travel. They changed relationships. Once two valleys touched, ideas flowed too. Stories mingled, new words were heard, and culture traveled on shaky ropes and wet wood. Even the simplest bridge is more than its pieces. It is an invitation, a gentle refusal to let the wild remain divided. In these earliest crossings, civilization took its first step toward togetherness and kept walking. High in the frozen Andes, where river valleys cut so deep the ground seems to vanish, the Inca answered nature's challenge in their own way. Their network of roads crossed mountains for thousands of miles. But it was the bridge, especially the rope bridge, called the Queswachaka, that stretched the limits of possibility. Made entirely from a mountain grass called ichu, these bridges were not built alone, nor quickly. The whole community gathered every year to rebuild them by hand. Each home prepared its own stretch of rope. Together they wove, sang, and pulled, following traditions remembered for longer than any one lifetime. These bridges sometimes crossed more than 30 meters in a single leap, swaying with the mountain winds, not made with pegs or bolts, but only with tension, faith, and teamwork. Still, these grass bridges were reliable. They bore the weight of traders, animals, and runners, keeping the empire living and growing, joining canyons that stone could never touch. They looked delicate, floating over the emptiness, bending and singing with the wind, but rarely coming undone. And when one finally fell, it was not a defeat, but the start of a new cycle, ready to be remade by many hands. These were not just structures, they were sacred. Rebuilding them each year reminded everyone that the earth is something to work with, not to conquer. That real connection is grown, not forced. No other empire knew this so well. Even today, one such bridge still spans a river, renewed each year by people near Hunchiri, Peru. UNESCO has named it a treasure to be preserved, not just for visitors, but for those who remember how to repair. In a time when so much is simply replaced and forgotten, the Inca Bridge teaches that real strength can be found in grass, in community labor, and in the willingness to reach across. Far from these heights, in the riverlands of ancient China, a different way of building bridges appeared, one valuing lasting strength and gentle form over movement and sway. Builders here looked at bridges as more than tools. They saw them as symbols, tying earth and sky together in ways that felt both natural and precise. As early as the Zhou dynasty, builders experimented with wood beams and floating bridges, but during the Han, Sui, and Tang ages, something miraculous happened: the segmental arch bridge. Rather than the high, bold curves found in the Roman world, Chinese arches rose softly, providing steadiness for passing carts and herds. These shapes were not just for beauty. They carried wisdom about weight and pressure unmatched for hundreds of years. Take, for example, the Jiaozhou Bridge, built under Li Chun in the early 600s. Its single span stretches over a wide river with unexpected grace. Smaller openings cut through its base reduce weight and let floodwater pass. These were solutions years ahead of their time, showing an understanding of how nature and structure meet. But Chinese bridges were always more than engineering, lined with stone lions that protected not only travelers but also the spirit of the place. Their names recalled good fortune and deep meaning. Many stood near temples and gardens, inviting reflection and quiet as much as travel. In works painted by scholars and poets, the bridge became a theme, a crossing that stood for change, for balance, for the strength to stay still amid a moving world. In China, every bridge was more than just rocks and mortar. It was a mark of spiritual geometry, each stone a pledge to harmony. If China built for balance, Rome built for power. For the Romans, a bridge was never just a crossing. It was a bold statement. We will endure, no matter what lies before us. As Rome expanded, rivers and valleys were not seen as limits. They were simply problems to be solved, one after another. Using knowledge passed from the Etruscans, Roman engineers took the arch and transformed it into something grand and lasting. With stone, concrete, and skill, they raised bridges that not only stood the test of centuries, but reshaped the world. One of the most storied is the Pons Fabricius, completed in 62 BCE, which even now carries people over the Tiber. Think of all it has seen: wars, floods, footsteps, yet it stands. The Roman arch was their great secret. By spreading weight evenly, it allowed bridges to stretch wider and hold more. The Romans also borrowed from a special concrete that could harden underwater, letting them build where few others could. These weren't just functional, they were full of dignity and pride, sometimes lined with fine stone, inscribed with names of mighty leaders, or made part of aqueducts like the stunning Pont du Gard in France. For soldiers, a Roman bridge meant swift movement. For traders, richer days ahead. But for the empire, it was proof of permanence, a way of saying they would last. While Roman roads were famously straight, it was their bridges that truly connected places. As the days of Rome faded, many of their bridges remained, rebuilt, reimagined, but still vital. To cross one is to feel history under your feet, a path once taken by conquerors and dreamers alike. Meanwhile, in the lush hills of ancient India, nature itself became the bridge builder. In Meghalaya, where rain falls nearly every day and floods can sweep away most man-made crossings, communities found a different solution. They did not use lumber, cord, or bricks, but living trees. The Khasi and Jaintia people learned to guide the roots of the rubber fig tree across streams and gorges, shaping them year after year into strong, living bridges. Hollow reeds and bamboo helped show the roots where to grow, and when two met on the far side, they were woven together and anchored in earth. Each one took years to complete, sometimes a generation's worth of care. But unlike ordinary wood, these bridges didn't rot. They grew stronger. Children could walk the paths their ancestors had begun. There was no written plan, only memory, patience, and tradition shared through doing and watching. These living bridges were beautiful, winding through jungle and waterfall, blending into the world around them. In a time that values speed, these bridges remind us that the slow, careful path can be just as strong, and perhaps more lasting. Across endless deserts and green riverbanks, the first societies of the Fertile Crescent, along the Tigris and Euphrates, saw both the blessing and the challenge of mighty rivers. They fed fields and gave life, but they also split the land. Where division appears, so does invention. Lacking stone and iron, Mesopotamians used what the land allowed: mud bricks, wood, reeds, imagination. Babylon itself, divided by the Euphrates, was still held together by crossings. Ancient accounts, like those told by Herodotus, describe movable bridges built on boats, lashed with papyrus, taken apart at night to shield from enemies. Their bridges could be humble, meant to survive a single season, or built with baked bricks on deep-set piers. The people here did not force the river. They learned its patterns, built above, around, even at times under its streams. These bridges were not just practical. They were lines of power. Control the bridge, command the city's fate. As empires like Assyria and Persia rose, so did more ambitious crossings, blending wood, stone, and clay, born from the same basic logic, just scaled up. Even if most Mesopotamian bridges did not last through centuries, their purpose was clear. Where people and trade must move, connection must follow. Each crossing stood as proof that commerce, community, and hope could outwit even the wildest water. In Greece, the world was seen as a thing to be shaped, weighed, and balanced. Their bridges followed the same care as their temples or statues, not always massive but thoughtful and precise. They were built most often across modest streams or rocky dips, with elegance instead of grandeur. A quiet example is the Archidiko Bridge in the Peloponnese, dating to around 1300 BCE. It is made of large, unmortared stones shaped with such care that it still stands, bearing everyday footsteps, just as it did so long ago. There are no bold symbols, no marks of empire, just an ancient span at peace with its land. The Greeks understood both strength and style. Their bridges didn't just function, they fit. Many were placed along sacred routes, guiding festival-goers or worshippers to distant temples. Here, crossing a bridge was not only about travel, it was about journeying toward the sacred. In later times, as Greek cities learned from neighbors and new technologies emerged, their bridges grew more diverse, sometimes blending wood with stone, even including drains and railings. Yet always they framed the view, matching the lines of hill and sky, letting the bridge be part of the land's poetry. For these thinkers, a bridge was more than stone. It was an image of transition, of balance between earth and air, between mortals and the divine, always thoughtful, always calm. Egypt, with its eternal river, worked differently. Here the Nile was less a barrier to conquer and more a road of life. Boats most often served as bridges, but when a crossing was needed, it was done with purpose and meaning. Civilization here kept close to the water's edge, channels, canals, irrigation paths, and where land needed linking, the Egyptians built smaller stone causeways, wooden walkways, or narrow raised paths. One early example, found at Deir el-Medina, shows careful planning. Small stone walkways lifted people over ditches and sunken ground, leveling paths with the landscape's needs. More impressive still are the great ceremonial causeways, linking the river to the pyramids at Giza. Though not bridges in the usual sense, they carried processions, goods for the pharaoh, chariots, and, in religious rites, the king himself to his final resting place. Here, the crossing was both real and spiritual, a passage from this world to the next. As Egypt's land filled with towns, more bridges were built, spanning canals, connecting temple grounds, or tying together fields. Wood disappeared, but stone and earth remembered. For the Egyptians, the bridge was never a symbol of conquest. It was a path for water, grain, and memory, a quiet, lasting witness to the journey from one realm to another. As the ancient world passed into new ages, its bridges remained, silent witnesses to dreams and fears, to bright ideas and durable hopes. Some faded beneath floods or soil, lost to wars long past. But others stand, an Indian root bridge, a Roman arch, a Greek stone path, silent but still strong. What connects these ancient bridges, whether spun from grass or carved from stone or born from living wood, is that they are rooted in hope. Not always religious hope, but the deep belief that what is separated can be joined, that those on the far side are worth reaching for. Each civilization found its own method. The Incas used pulling and tension. The Romans pressed down with weight. The Chinese shaped gentle curves. The people of Mesopotamia learned to float, yet the idea stayed the same: overcome distance, leave none out, and let each bridge declare not only its builder's skills, but their dreams and values. The Incas trusted in time, the Greeks in harmony, the Egyptians in eternity, the Romans in the power of stone. More than just structures, bridges became stories: a rope bridge softly speaking of togetherness, a Roman aqueduct thundering empire, a Chinese stone span whispering peace. Bridges didn't only move bodies but carried customs, hopes, and meaning. Some arose out of rush and desperation. Others were made with ritual and song, cared for by hands young and old. Everyone needed more than strength. It needed cooperation and patience. So when we walk across old bridges today, we should pause. Each step is on the old dreams of someone long gone, dreams that still hold firm. Remember, before words filled clay or voices filled temples with hymns, there was simply sound. Not music as we know it, but rhythm, nature's own melody waiting to be found. The fire's crackle, the steady drip of water, the leaf's soft rustle, and the quiet beat of feet. These were the first ways we listened and learned to imitate. From these echoes, early humans made music. Some of our oldest instruments, like bird-bone flutes and mammoth ivory pipes from caves in Germany, are more than 40,000 years old. Small holes, carefully drilled, show purpose, not just for noise but for real notes. These were no children's toys but ways to soothe, gather, remember. Imagine someone, thousands of years ago, blowing a gentle tune into darkness, a lullaby, a hunting song, a comfort for the dying, or a cry to the sacred. Early music was not for amusement, but for memory itself. Simple rhythms, clapping or drumming, could bring people together, speed the harvest, or scare away threats. Repeating the same patterns made things easy to recall. Before the world knew writing, lessons were sung. This was the birth of storytelling, memory, and art, all at once. Across ancient cultures, we see percussion, wooden sticks, rattling seeds, stretched hides played in time, filling the rituals that held communities together. Music needed no shared tongue. It only needed a beat two hearts could follow. Music soon cradled belief. In old graves, we find drums, bells, and pipes lying beside the dead, perhaps to comfort on the journey after death, or maybe for those left behind, to mourn and remember. These first songs were both survival and celebration, a new way for people to feel, to share joy and sorrow, to create togetherness long before cities or legends. In the heartlands carved by the Tigris and Euphrates, rhythm and music became the threads holding life in place. From Sumer to Babylon, in sacred houses and lively halls, music organized life, bound people to the gods, and ordered time. Early Sumerian seals and carvings show musicians, lyres, and flutes in hand. The real marvel, though, was the instruments themselves, adorned with shining gold and carved designs, made not only for beauty, but for the journey to the afterlife. These delicate lyres, with strings plucked softly by skilled hands, filled the courts and temples with sound. Some musicians trained as priests, others as entertainers. Each part of life, from sacred rituals to royal feasts to the fury of war, had its own song. The very first musical notation, a clay tablet from Ugarit, captures not just words but instructions for how to play, a sign that structured music held deep meaning. Mesopotamian thinkers, like those in Babylon, believed music echoed the greater order of the universe. If the stars kept time, so did music. It could reflect divine harmony, a thought that spread far, even reaching Greece. Whether sung for a goddess or strummed in crowded markets, music here lived on many levels, holy, joyful, official, or everyday. It linked people to gods, message to ceremony, heart to memory, a thread tying the invisible together. In Egypt, where pharaohs ruled in splendor and gods watched with animal faces, music moved like the river, constant, giving, and sacred. It floated through temple halls, hummed over market stalls, and followed each soul from birth to the end. Music in Egypt was more than pretty sound. It was believed to hold magic, easing gods, mending the sick, or guiding souls after life. Some instruments, like the sistrum, a kind of rattle, were gifts thought to come from heaven. Murals in tombs painted thousands of years ago show harps, flutes, and lyres, each one distinct, shaped with care. Harps came in various forms, their gut strings filling both temple services and noble gatherings. Priests and priestesses were not only guardians of text, but also of sound. Certain notes belonged to particular gods or feelings, some for mourning, others for praise or healing. No moment was without its melody. Music in Egypt was for all, from the grand processions to the bustling city street. Percussion, from clappers to small drums, filled community festivals, often led by women, whether delighting crowds or leading the mourning at burials. Their language even had words for musical moods, joy, sorrow, praise, woven into everyday life and the final journey after death. Even in grief, there was a song for passage, a belief that sound gently held the soul as it crossed to the next world. To the Greeks, music was never just a pastime. It was a form of study, a way to understand the very nature of existence. It was order, medicine, philosophy, and prophecy. The Greek word for music included poetry, dance, and song, the entire realm of inspiration, watched over by the muses themselves. To make music was to tap into something beyond the human, to draw directly from divine energy. Lyres, stringed and gentle, were everywhere, especially tied to the god Apollo. Learning to play, especially for boys from well-to-do families, was part of growing up. The larger cithara was the choice of professionals and honored in religious celebrations. The aulos, a double reed instrument, sometimes sharp and shrill, accompanied actors and soldiers alike. Theater and music were inseparable. Greek plays were sung as much as spoken. Rhythm and melody shaped the fate told on stage, filling each tragedy with life. The study of music also meant uncovering its secrets. Pythagoras, known for his numbers, believed harmony could be found in simple ratios, 2-to-1, 3-to-2, and so on. From this, the myth of cosmic music was born, a belief that planets themselves moved in silent song too pure for human hearing. Plato wrote that music shaped society, believing that some scales uplifted and others did harm. To choose music was to choose a path for both person and city. For the Greeks, every song, every note, was touching the balance of the world. The Romans, by contrast, were more practical. As their empire stretched across lands and seas, they absorbed sounds and instruments from everywhere. Etruscan trumpets, Greek lyres, Eastern pipes. Music filled every part of Roman life: shrines, camps, theaters, feasts, and even the noisy arena. The cornu, a long curved horn, gave orders in battle. Sharp, loud, not exactly beautiful, but vital for survival. In the city, the music turned rich and varied. The tibia, like the Greek aulos, for sacrifices. The hydraulis, a water organ, for shows and ceremonies. Its voice fit for Roman spectacle. At fine dinners and private gatherings, music calmed or charmed. Women and enslaved performers played strings. Dancers moved with gentle rhythms, all to entertain and impress. In the home, To own music was to show status. In worship, chants and special forms known as carmen were believed to shape destiny. Rome rarely created its own styles, but instead welcomed, blended, and reshaped music, as it did so many other things. As its legions marched, they carried with them the music of empire, spreading sound as surely as law and language. India's earliest music is harder to know, but traces speak of a subtle, thoughtful culture. In the Indus Valley, before Sanskrit chants rang in temples, people played with rhythm and tone. No writing survives to tell us about melodies, but the remains, ceramic drums, shell trumpets, delicate bone flutes, suggest an ear for order and beauty. Some flutes were so carefully made, with precisely spaced holes, that their makers clearly understood scale and pitch. Small, dancing clay figures found at ancient sites speak of celebration, of music paired with movement, of lives lived close to both beat and melody. Over time, ritual chanting grew more complex. The Vedas, sacred texts of early Hinduism, were spoken with exact melodies, each pattern meant to keep the universe in balance. As the centuries passed, music in India widened into ragas and talas, melodic and rhythmic frameworks that became the heart of spiritual practice. From the simple bones of the Indus Valley arose music as a way to join earth and spirit, time and the infinite. In China, music was never just for pleasure. Deeply rooted in philosophies like Confucianism and Taoism, it existed to reflect and bring about order between heaven, earth, and humanity. Even the oldest instruments, stone chimes, bone flutes, were crafted with care to represent balance and the five elements. By the time of the Zhou dynasty, music had become a main pillar of proper rule. Confucius himself believed music could shape a person's soul and reflected the health of the nation. Gentle melodies, played on the qin, a plucked zither, were less about entertaining crowds and more about personal reflection. The player, seated alone, found harmony between thought and sound. Ritual and ceremony used richer ensembles, wind instruments, drums, and bells, all arranged to maintain balance. Official music had strict rules, every note assigned its purpose, every silence its meaning. Even the Chinese scales, built on 5 simple notes, invited a sense of calm and flowing transition, imitating the feeling of drifting water or gentle wind. In China, music wasn't just sound, it was a way of living well. Among the Hebrew people, music served as a bridge between the ordinary and the sacred. From the first pages of their oldest texts, music is seen as a precious gift, a way to celebrate, to mourn, to remember, and to worship. Jubal, called the father of musicians, appears at the dawn of Genesis. After crossing the sea to freedom, Miriam and the women danced and sang, turning a historical moment into a song that would be remembered for generations. King David shines as both a warrior and a musician, the one who soothed troubled minds with his harp. Under his rule, music became a part of religious life. Temple musicians kept the traditions alive, preserving the Psalms, songs of both joy and sorrow, chanted with lyres, harps, and cymbals, each prayer carried on melody and memory. After the first temple fell, music traveled with the people into exile, kept alive by those who sang of home beside foreign rivers. In this way, Hebrew music became not just sound, but resilience, spanning centuries, continents, and hardship, always circling back to hope and devotion. As ancient times made way for new ages, music transformed but did not vanish. Instruments changed shape, melodies shifted, but their spirit lived on. The soft echo of a Mesopotamian lyre, the bright shake of an Egyptian sistrum, the silent pause between notes on a Chinese qin. These traces remain, scattered along the path of history. They pulse through painted and carved scenes, dancers on Minoan walls, harpists in Assyrian reliefs, players on Roman mosaics, reminding us that old music was never just background. It was at the heart of ritual, celebration, grief, and protest. Some of these ancient sounds still ripple through life today. Indian ragas follow the patterns set by Vedic chants. In China, musicians still play melodies with origins in Confucian temples. Hebrew psalms continue to be chanted in ways that echo 3,000 years of tradition. These are not just recreations, they are unbroken threads. Ancient music was never pressed into discs or captured as digital streams. It was passed through hands, in memory, in tradition, witnessed and lived, not locked away. We may never know just how an old Inca song or a hymn in a vanished city truly sounded, but when a rhythm finds our feet, when a voice rises without plan, or when a song brings us close to tears, that is something ancient, still alive. The world may change, empires may crumble, but that music endures, not as relics in a museum, but as hope and memory carried quietly, gently in us all. In us.